Okay, so I've been making these weaves for the last little bit, and I just kind of thought it'd be neat to make a tutorial about this. Just how I usually go about making these things. Now, generally, what I do is I like to make these things using 3D software and not necessarily Photoshop. Photoshop is used to add details on top of the actual weaves to make it look more like actual cloth and fabric. Um, but yeah, you can use any kind of tools that you want for this. You could use Max or Maya or Cinema or Lightwave or whatever it is that you want. It really doesn't matter. As long as you have a grid and you can be somewhat accurate with this, it just honestly doesn't matter. I'm going to use Houdini for this just because it's one of those kind of overlooked tools. And just show it a little bit off. So yeah, here's Houdini. I'm not gonna go into the interface too much. As far as the navigation in the viewer goes, you use right click to. If you hold right click, just right click on its own, you can zoom. Middle click is pan, and left click should be orbiting around your object. But I am stuck in orthographic view. Now, space you can use to do the same to just make sure that you lock it. Because if you're for example using something like the select tool, select will have its own functions. Right click will drop the tool. Left click will select whatever item you want. So in those cases, if you have a tool selected, then you have to use space and right click, middle click, and left click to actually navigate. Spacebar overrides whatever tool you have currently selected, and it allows you to just navigate without that. Anyways, I'm just gonna go in here, and this is right now it's set up as my, if I just right click in here, it's set up as my network view, and this is where I'm going to be placing all my nodes. And actually, what I might want to do is I might want to do something like this, or rather, I'm just gonna change this up. I'm gonna make this my network view, and I'm gonna make this my scene view. Now, I know that this is a fairly tiny viewport, but where is it? I want to go into the front for now. Okay, this will just give me a lot more space to actually, use for placing my notes. All right, so I am in the. Actually, am I? Anyways, yeah, okay. So basically, what I've done is I already have a geometric node here, so I'm just gonna exit it. But anyways, at the root of your scene, if you just go out to obj, you'll notice this thing called scene here, and this is where all your objects will be placed. So I'm just gonna go ahead and just press tab on my keyboard. I'm gonna press G for geometry, and I'm gonna place a container which is going to hold all my files that are gonna make up my main model that I'm gonna create. I'm gonna press enter now to go inside it, and once I'm inside it, this changes to geometry. You'll notice, and I'm inside here. This almost works like a folder structure inside of Windows, where you have C drive, and then you have a folder, etc., etc. So right now I am inside the geometric container or folder, if you want to name it that. And originally you're going to be presented with a file node. Don't need it. I'm just gonna delete that. Now remember, just because I deleted it doesn't mean I'm back into that I have nothing available. I'm still inside my geometric container. I just deleted whatever file was inside that geometric container by default. Now what I'm going to do now is there's a few things I could do. I could either draw a spline, or I could make a line and deform it and then work from that. But the idea is that if I just go ahead and make a spline, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw it in the viewport. If I press tab, and then I go to Nurbs, and I guess this might actually, considering how small my viewport is right now, just because I shrunk it down a little bit for the tutorial here, I guess it might work better with this. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and go into Nurbs, and I am going to go, actually, no, not Nurbs, but I want to go ahead and just choose curve. So I'm going to go ahead and place a curve, and I'm going to start drawing it like that. So for this way, for this way, for like that. Now, if you're going to be running out of space, remember you can always use spacebar, move your viewport a bit, and get back into doing your stuff. And when you want to finish whatever it is that you're doing, just go stop building curve and show handles. Okay. This will enable you to select whatever it is that you want to work on. And it also tells you right on the bottom that you can shift click to insert points. So if I wanted to, I could easily hold shift and just insert points and move them around exactly as I want. Okay, so I have this curve object here placed. I'm gonna go ahead and just press enter in there. Okay, so now what do we do? Well, the next part will be for me to take a circle, and I'm going to want to loft it around this object here. So I'm going to go ahead and just place a circle by, I'm going to basically do that by, again, pressing tab. I'm going to press C for circle, or I can just keep continuing to type. So CIR, and then I get circle. I get to place that here, and you see a circle like that. And here you have my render flag, or my output flag, and basically what this means is that this is as far as I've gone with the object. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. Okay, so I have my curve, I have my circle, and now if I go ahead and just tab and go into what was it? I don't really do this often, to be honest. I think it's under manipulate. Manipulate. Right. Okay, anyways, I'm looking for sweep. So if I just go ahead and sweep, what you'll notice is the node is going to go all red, and that means it hasn't been fed the proper information just yet. So if I go ahead and go on any of these inputs, I can middle click, and it'll tell you that it's looking for the cross section. Here it's looking for the backbone, and what we're going to do is the curve will act as a backbone, and this is going to act as the cross section. So cross section goes in here. I can just middle or left click in here, connect it up, and connect this as well. And right now you get nothing. Now this is set as primitive, so I'm just going to go ahead and just choose this as a Nurbs curve. I'm going to make sure that this is chosen as a Nurbs curve. And then I'm going to go back and click on this, and under output I'm going to make sure that it actually draws a skin, or that it connects all these points up properly. So I'm just going to go and just use this. Okay, so now we have a skinned object. Now I'm still not liking this, just because this angle isn't 45 degrees and neither is this. So I'm just going to go ahead and play with my object a little bit here. No, that's not it either. That's about 45. No, that's not it. I guess I could just use polygons. Now, one thing that you could do, of course, at this point, is if you don't like this curve that you have, what you could do is you could, there's a few options. One, you could just go ahead and place a transform node. So TR, so transform. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pipe this in here, pipe that in there. So now this curve goes through a transform node and then into the sweep. Now, if I go ahead and just select this node here and go into the properties, what I'll be able to do is I can either manually scale the curve like this, or I can just go ahead and scale it on the y-axis. So obviously the first one is x, y, and then z. So I go to scale, I can scale it down like this. And then what I could do after this, again, I could keep playing with the curves and whatnot, but I think this will do for now. Anyways, so I've made a curve, and the next part, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and copy this once. So C, copy, and I'm going to try to align all of it together. So I'm going to make not number of copy 1, because if you have a number of copy 1, this just means that you have one object, and this is just your number 1 object. If you have 0, nothing is showing, and if you have 2, then you've actually made a copy or a duplicate of your current object. So we are on X, and I want to make my copy on X, on the X axis, like that. Okay, so I have one copy of, whatever I have made of my, one link here. Now, I will most likely want a few more than this, so I'm just going to go ahead and bump up my number of copies slightly, and that's okay-ish. So what are we going to do next? Well, right now, all these copies are still disconnected. Now, the reason why I know this is because if I go ahead and just, I could turn off these points for now. If I just click here, this will show me the vertex numbers for my model. Now you notice right around here, the numbers become very garbled. Specifically, like for example, if you just look at here, you see 167, and in here, I can't actually read that number. So it doesn't matter if it's all garbled around here, just because there's a bunch of numbers that are actually over top of one another. But in here, you see the vertices for the very end of this object, and the vertex numbers for the very end of this object. So it's all overlapping. So sometimes if you have, for example, an object that looks like it's continuous, but it's got, overlapping, garbled vertex numbers, then that means that these vertices are not welded. So what I'm going to go ahead is I'm just going to go right click on here. I'm going to press F and find fuse. So I'm going to fuse these vertices. Now, they're still unfused because the distance is not great enough. So I'm just going to keep bumping that value up until it gets connected. So now you might have noticed it is, in fact, fused. Okay, so we have something like this. Now, the reason why I wanted to fuse them right now and not after I'm done everything is because it only has to go through a very small set of geometry to fuse, because what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to be making more and more copies of this thing. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just press space on my keyboard, right click. I'm going to go to the perspective viewport, and I'm also going to turn off my vertex numbers. Okay, so we have something like this. Now the advantage of having something like this, as it is, done especially this way, is because now I can go back into my transform node. I can very easily scale my fabric like this, my little weave here, although it's not weaved yet. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and make another copy. So copy, and I'm going to go ahead and offset it on the z-axis. So I'm going to offset it on the z, and I have to make sure that I make one more copy. So I'm going to go ahead and offset it by a bit, and 5 might be enough. And now what I have to do is I have to offset it on this axis. Now, it might be a little bit tricky to see exactly what it, how much you're offsetting, and you might want to, and with weaves, you have to be fairly accurate. So I'm just going to go back into, just going to go ahead and just go to front again. And at the same time, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to press smooth wire shaded. And I'm just going to make sure that this line here is aligned with that. And everything seems to be just fine for now. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go back into perspective. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another copy. Once again, 2. And this time I'm going to go ahead and just move it on the Z. And 10 is fine. Okay, so now I have something like this. Now, why did I make a copy of a copy and not just kept copying this one? Well, the reason is because if I, for example, go back here, and if I kept copying, then I would have gotten a pattern going in that direction. And I don't want that. What I want is I want to generate a grid-like, some grid-like shape, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back in here. And if I just keep bumping this one up now, or rather, I'm still selecting this one here. If I go ahead and just bump this one up now, you notice that it's growing in one direction, which is perfect. Now I could go back into this one here. I could keep making it, grow it in length. And I get something like that. Now, right now I'm working with Nurbs, and I might not want that. So what I'm going to go ahead is I'm just going to move this down, and I'm going to go back into the sweep to the original model that I had. And I'm going to right click on here, and I'm going to go to convert. And I'm going to convert the geometry from Nurbs into polygons. So I have something like this for now. And I'm just going to lower the geometry until it's a very, very simple model. Now when I go back in here, you'll notice that it's much faster to navigate around it. Okay, so we have something like this. What do we do next? Well, the next part that I'm going to have to do is I'm going to want to copy this entire thing and weave it the other way. So, make yet another copy. Like that. And this time you just want to make, you just want to bump up the value just once. Rotate around the Y, and you want to rotate possibly, actually I'm going to rotate it 270 degrees. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and translate it. So move it until you get something like that. And here it might get a little tricky, because what you have to do now is you have to move it until it overlaps just right. Sometimes this gets a little tricky, getting that distance just right. Now, oftentimes what happens is, like one of your earlier copies might have been slightly off. Like in this case, like that. And now I think, no, that still doesn't work. Anyways, yeah, basically what you have to do is you have to keep playing with these values until they work. Now, the way I usually go about this is different than this. But anyways, the idea is that you create a circle to loft or sweep. You create the backbone, so you create your spline, you sweep it till you get a result like this. And then you just keep duplicating it in a way until you get a weave. Now, the way I usually do this, and I'm just going to very quickly do this, is I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this curve here, or rather what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and just place a line. And this is a much cleaner approach to doing this. And I'm just going to go ahead and just place I'm going to press the vertex button here. And now what I have is I have 1 point here and 1 point here. Now what this gives me is it gives me a line with 2 points, as you can see right here. I'm going to go ahead and just bump up that number slightly. And I'm going to change the direction because right now it's pointing on the y-axis, so it's pointing up. And I want it to point on the x, like this. Okay, so I have myself a point or a line that travels on that axis. Okay, that's perfectly fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I want to affect this on, I want to affect all these points, but only, I want to basically affect them in almost like a sine wave. So basically I want to affect these points on the y-axis only. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to point. And I'm going to give these points, all these points, a specific behavior. So on the y-axis, I'm going to just type in here. I'm going to get rid of ty. And I'm just going to type in sine. And usually if you type in whatever, it'll tell you, like you'll be able to actually just type, the actual expression. And for help, it'll usually tell you exactly what it's expecting. Now in this case, I want to affect the points. I'm going to multiply that by, I don't know, 20. And you get something like that. So this is the beginning of a sine wave. Now if I go ahead and just add more points, I'm going to get a result like this. And that's pretty good. Next part, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add a transform node. The reason I'm adding a transform node here is basically because what I have here is I don't want to necessarily type in this value every single time, to change it. I want something interactive, so I'm going to go ahead and just use the scale to scale down the, the sine wave. Now, this isn't necessarily perfectly, like all these points aren't exactly perfectly spaced, but that's okay. Anyways, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to sweep that, and I'm going to see what I get here. Now, this is obviously too much, but if I go into the sweep node, and I go back into here, I go into the properties, I can change the scale of the actual sweep. All right, that's pretty good. I can go into convert, copy, and actually the copy is probably way too big, and I was right. So what I'm going to have to do is, you know what, I might as well just copy this network altogether. I don't really want to get rid of what I had before. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this value a lot smaller. Like that. It's going to fuse, and it's going to fuse with a large number. So I'm just going to have to get rid of that. I'm going to go ahead and just turn on the numbers just so that I can see exactly if I've deleted my values. And you know what, I'm just going to trust it. Okay, so I got something like this. I'm going to go ahead and just copy. Of course, I have to readjust my values. Okay, so 0.5 and 0.5 is good. That's going to give me a perfect alignment. Next, I'm going to go ahead and just press click here, select, and once again, I got way too many not too many copies, but the offset is way too big. So now I know that since I moved this one by 0.5, then I just gotta move this on -1. Okay, that'll work. Now my next copy. I'm gonna make that 0. I'm gonna make this 0. And that's okay. I just have to move this now on the appropriate axis. Like that. And this, as you can see here, is actually working out pretty good. Now, the only thing that's not working pretty good is the scale of the actual wave here. So I'm just going to go back into here, and I'm going to scale this down until... Oh yeah, by the way I'm scaling this is I'm just using the middle click button. I know it's kind of late, but anyways, go ahead and do something like that. And you got yourself pretty much a weave. Now, it's pretty cool because what I can do is I can go back into sweep. I can increase the scale to whatever it is that I want. And now obviously the scale of the actual sine wave doesn't work, so I just go back into there. I scale it up until it overlaps properly. That's pretty good. And what I can always do is I can just go back into my copies, just make sure I make more or less. And you know what? Something like this is actually okay. Like this is actually more than enough to make my pattern. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to subdivide this first. Actually, no, you know what? Before I subdivide, actually, I'm not going to subdivide it in here because I'm going to subdivide it in ZBrush. But I'm going to go ahead and just right click here. And now I'm just going to, actually, no, not right click on here. I'm going to select my node, right click here. And then in here, save geometry. And here I'm just going to go ahead and choose my working directory. So fabric. And instead of BGO, what I want to choose, I want to change this to an OBJ. So OBJ here. Untitled BGO. I'm going to change that to weave02. Build files. Accept. Accept. Okay. Now I'm going to go into ZBrush. And inside ZBrush, I'm just going to go ahead and import the build file. So, why isn't it there? Is it still saving? Okay, hopefully it did it this time. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now we have a weave02. I'm just going to go ahead and click that, and you get something like this. Now, my normals are inverted, so I'm just going to go ahead and click flip. And now I have my weave in here inside of ZBrush. Okay, cool. So now I'm just going to go ahead and divide that until the result is smoother. And yeah, that's pretty good. I'm going to fill the screen a bunch till I get something like this. And I'm just going to go ahead and just click alpha. Actually, no, before I do that, actually, no, that's good. My one thing you have to make sure is that when you go to document, you have to make sure that your document is something square, more or less. I mean, it doesn't matter because I'm not filling this canvas exactly, and I'm going to crop this anyways. And now I'm going to go ahead and just go to alpha, grab document, and what you should get is you should get an alpha of like a perfect depth of your actual weave. So now you can export that as weave whatever, 05 PSD. Okay, and now you can go into Photoshop, and inside of Photoshop, you know what, I'm just going to minimize these just to keep things simpler. Okay, I'm going to open up my weave fabric. It exists in, actually, wrong folder. Also project directory, inside of there I got a fabric build files weave05, and I have my weave. Now I'm going to have to crop this so that it can be perfectly tiled. Now, I don't actually need all this because, well, I just don't. What I only need is I just need a small section of this anyways. I'm just going to go ahead, crop this inside of Photoshop. I'm going to have to make sure that on one side it's black and on one side I get the white so that it tiles. If I had one of these, then you'd get double if you tiled. Well, you'll see in a sec. Anyways, I'm just going to commit to that selection. This looks pretty good. Now that I have this, I am going to first off go to offset, but I'm going to go to filters, other, offset through here. And one thing you might notice is that this will not work at all. This is no good. This is not what I want. As you can see, this and that just doesn't do. So I'm going to go back and get out of my crop mode. And you have to make sure that when you're doing something like this, that you got a nice crop for something that's going to work. So something like this should probably work better. Is it? Something like this. Yeah, this should technically work. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just click that again. Hopefully I'm not doing anything wrong. Anyways, let's see if the offset thing works. And I'm not getting any problems here, so I'm just going to go ahead and offset. I'm going to choose different values. And as you can see, I'm offsetting. I'm not getting any seams anywhere. So 0, 0 will work, or just go to cancel. And now when you go to edit, define pattern, I want to define this as a pattern. Weave 05, I guess that's fine. And now what I can do is I can go ahead and just make a new texture. 124 by 124 is fine. It's going to be blank. Go to layer, new fill layer, pattern, weave, and you get our weave applied as a pattern. Now the cool part is that I can go ahead and scale, and I can scale this down to whatever it is that I want. And granted, I can only scale down so far, but something like this is, you know, pretty cool. Now it gets even cooler because this is live. I can always go back to this at any time I want, and I can change the scale of my actual tile. So now what I can do is I can just go ahead and make a new layer. I can open up yet another image. I'm going to go into my textures folder, and inside of my textures folder I'm going to go into fabrics. I don't know, I'm just going to choose some random file that's fairly flat. I don't know, maybe something like this. And I think that's the same one I used before on my other texture file. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Control A, Control C to copy that. I'm going to paste it in here. And I'm going to paste it again. And again. And again. And now I'm just going to go ahead and just press Control E a bunch of times until I merges the layers. Now I'm going to go to Control A, Control C, and then Control V. Going to align it with that. Control V again, and again, and now Control E, E, E. Okay, so now I have something like this. I'm going to select in here and then just use the scroller until I reach multiply. I might want to lower the intensity, but you get something like this. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and create a new layer. And now I can very easily paint, you know, whatever I want on here. Change the layer mode to something like this. Maybe I can paint some stains on my fabric here. Now if I lowered my pressure sensitivity or my opacity, this might work out a little bit better. So I can very easily stain out my, you know, cloth here. And again, the cool thing is that this is always live, so I can just go back and click and I can very easily change the tile of my weave. Now this whole workflow actually becomes even cooler, because the reason why I did this inside of Houdini to begin with is because, again, I can replace, for example, this circle with something like a square. So let's just say, or whatever else I want. So if I go back to the circle here, what if I was to, I don't know, maybe convert this circle to a, instead of Nurbs curve. Actually, no, Nurbs curve is fine. I'm just going to go ahead and just go to this tool here, select. I'm going to make sure I select not primitives, but rather vertices or points. Now I'm going to go ahead and just press edit. I'm going to move these points down, move these points up. And now if you notice, after I sweep, if I go in here, you'll notice that my shape is very different than before. Now I can always just go back into my sweep. I can just go ahead and roll this until it's been flattened out. And you know what, if I wanted to, I could always go back into my edit mode. And just keep tweaking this shape as much as I want. Now this could actually be even cooler if I, for example, if I did this, if I made this, or if I converted it to a polygon, for example, I could do all sorts of really neat things. But yeah, I mean, you could just flatten this out and you automatically have an updated version of your weave. If I wanted to, I could even add, after my curve that I'm sweeping, I could just even flatten it out even further. So I could just make a, whoops. I could go ahead and just tab transform. I'm going to add a transform between the edit and the circle. Scale it down and maybe scale it on, I don't know if it's the X. Yeah, there we go. So maybe scale it on the X to give me something like this. And then I go back into here, scale it like that. And I'm getting some roll again, so I just gotta go back into my sweep. I gotta remove my roll here. Whoops. Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and you know what? Actually, I should really select all that first. Okay. So anyways, yeah, I'm just going to remove my roll here until it works. But yeah, I mean, like, notice how fast, how really quickly I changed my weave altogether. I have something like this now. If I wanted to, I could easily edit the shape of my backbone that I used to drive this, and I could even make it into a fence where, for example, instead of this being a wave, a nice and smooth wave, maybe I could make the tops and bottoms very harsh, and then like in between, instead of making a nice straight curve, it could be just a flat line between the tops and the bottoms. And then I would obviously have to lower the scale between the top and the bottom, but that's basically how I would go about making a fence, for example. So yeah, I mean, this is just a really fast way of doing this kind of stuff. I mean, you can just make yourself a network, you can save it out, and then use it and reuse it and do whatever it is that you want using this kind of setup. Excuse me. And then you basically just go into Photoshop for like 2 seconds, just load in your model very quickly. You know, just go grab doc, and then inside of Photoshop, you do your magic, and then from then on, you just have a texture, you know, that you could use with your cloth. And again, if we just go back in here, you know, I have a number of examples, and all of them were based on, you know, one network. So yeah, with that said, I think that's it. Cheers.